Welcome to our discussion this morning. We've got a lot to talk about, and we've got some new people to talk with us. Welcome, Lisa Armstrong and Jason from Ithaca. Lisa is a professor at Smith College, I believe, Women's Studies, and a member of the Art Perlo Workers Club. And Jason's a YCL activist at Cornell. And then we also have my good friend and comrade Ben Bath from New York City by way of Boston. Ben's been active here in New York for a long time now, several years, and is a member of the Lower Manhattan, I believe it's called the Elizabeth Gurley Flynn Club of the party. Welcome, all of you. We're going to be talking about the movement against the war in Gaza and a whole number of issues relating to it, including the right of free speech, the definition of anti-Semitism and its connection to alleged, actual, let me reverse that. We're going to be talking about uh, anti-Zionism and the accusation that it smacks of anti Semitism. In fact, there was a congressional resolution to that effect the other day. Um, Big things continuing to happen in the labor movement. We're going to dip into that. And then we're going to ask all of our panelists what is Taylor Swift, Time magazine named Taylor Swift the singer person of the year. Good for her. We want to know what is the movement of the year? Which movement in the United States or abroad would you nominate as movement of the year? So think about it, and maybe we'll do a poll of all of our readers and viewers, and we'll announce it in January. But first, let's get to Cornell. There, Jason, big sit in there. The students occupied two buildings and won some important demands. Tell us about it.
Cornell has a long history of Palestinian organizing. Uh, SJP has been very strong here, but there have been some systemic problems in Cornell, including the doxing of students and Cornell admin just generally being very apathetic to Palestinians. Before the Coalition for Mutual Liberation was created, there was movement in trying to get an acknowledgement of Palestinian suffering because it took two protests, I think, for admin to actually acknowledge that or even say the word Palestinian or Palestine in its emails sent to our student body. And they had tried numerous
Wouldn't say the
avenues.
word Palestinian.
What
Get
was
out
that?
of town. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it was really bad. Fortunately, they did on the third time around, but in doing so, they used very passive phrasing such as, unfortunately, Palestinians are being put in harm's way, as though they aren't the victims of a genocide, which we all know very well. And so the students went to the student assembly. They tried to get a resolution passed denouncing doxing and protecting the safety of our student activists. It was voted yes, but administration can very easily ignore things like that. So in after that stuff kind of didn't progress into anything tangible. The coalition was formed, especially after I think recently in the news, I think we all saw a man named Patrick Dye made very violent and vile comments toward Jewish and Muslim students. Um, it was very disgusting and it was very scary for a lot of the students here because those threats felt very real. But unfortunately, the Cornell administration did not really acknowledge the Islamophobic part of that. And so a lot of our Palestinian and Muslim comrades felt very uncomfortable and very unsafe and not protected. So we formed this coalition because, as the popular phrase goes, united we bargain, divided we beg. And they orchestrated numerous die-ins, they orchestrated numerous protests and teach-ins, and this all culminated in a week of action recently, where we had some art exhibitions, some chalking, some protests, another die-in, and another teach-in. which ended in what we now saw as the Day Hall occupation, or also William Strait occupation. And those are very important. We got well, I wasn't personally involved, but as an observer, the organizers that orchestrated this occupation won very large demands, such as getting a promise from Cornell administration to protect academic speech, supporting Palestinian self-determination, and criticizing the state of Israel, and that was very important. Second, they are working on this. Cornell said they aren't really in the business of making definitions, but they also have a demand where Cornell should make the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And even though they haven't made that distinction publicly yet, they have committed to protecting pro-Palestinian students who are being targeted due to the conflation of those two things. And the third and largest and most impressive demand that they've won is a commitment to revisions, or at least reviewing the endowment objectives, specifically its ESG policies, which means that Cornell could possibly be the first Ivy League to divest from Israel. And because, as the students here know, we have a strong partnership with Technion and other members of the military industrial complex, which fund and research into military technologies that are being used against the people of Gaza currently. Um, so yeah.
So united we bargain, divided we beg. I never heard that one before. That's a new one on me. I'm gonna have to add it to my list of slogans. Thank you for that. Coalition for Mutual Liberation. Who is being
That's right.
liberated, Jason, and who's part of the coalition?
Well, the coalition is comprised of numerous, probably a few dozen at this point, organizations. They're not being specified to protect the people who are in leadership and the membership generally, but they are comprised of a wide variety of organizations. They're not all necessarily explicitly political. They're community, affinity, ethnic organizations that just come together on a basis of protecting each other and ensuring liberation, not for, you know, those oppressed groups in general, but for humanity as a whole. That's basically been the goal of the coalition so far.
And our YCL comrades were active in this movement.
The party is looking toward maybe establishing a YCL. So far, it's been the youth in our club on campus participating in what has been called the safety team. We do have comrades in the coalition, but a lot of our work has been centered on making sure a lot of these demonstrations are safe, that they are peaceful, especially since in the early protests during all of this, there have been numerous incidents of Zionists intimidating the protesters, videotaping them, taking pictures of them, harassing them in general. And so it's been a very large concern. And our club has mostly been doing the work of trying to organize people to, you know, ensure safety and ensuring that these students are not subjected to further harassment.
Great, that kind of solidarity work is so important. You won two of the three demands: the free speech, as I understand it, and number two, the university is looking into or has made some pledges with respect to revising the endowment of objectives, making sure that they don't. I, it's military corporations that are of concern. No,
Mhm.
isn't that right, Jason?
Yeah, that's right. We have a lot of connections with them, both in our engineering school, you know, providing the people who make the bombs and who make the planes and UAPs or whatnot, but also just in a research capacity. You know, we partner with Cornell Technion, well, not Cornell Technion. We partner with the Israeli company Technion to build our facilities on Roosevelt Island in New York City. Um, and those partnerships go a long way. And so we have a lot of faculty here who have been involved in the military, involved in building those, you know, weapons that are used on the Palestinians and people abroad. You know, that's why they're able to be called as what's it called, field tested, right? Unfortunately, that's been the reality at Cornell and probably every other Ivy League or major university with the endowment that Cornell has.
Roosevelt Island in New York City, Ben. Keep that in mind. That's Technion, and New York City Party. Hint, hint,
Mhm.
hint. Also to our producer, and then there's another corporation, Tata Motors. I believe that you all are looking at. So let's keep those in mind. Well, Jason, congratulations to all of the students that were involved in this tremendous struggle. It's a big thing, occupying a building and threatening
Yeah.
arrest and getting kicked out of school and having, letters put in your file and that might follow you for a long time and so on and so forth. And so we salute your courage and extend our solidarity and congratulations. And when you get a chance, please write it up for the People's World and the party website. We want to know what you're doing, and the more of that we do that, the greater we're able to spread the word. The more it will encourage others to do likewise. So thanks for coming, and let's stay in touch. Great follow up to our peace conference that we held just a couple of weeks ago. Um, you know, Lisa, uh, you're on a college campus. These free speech issues, uh, hitting center stage where you are as well.
Absolutely. This is something that we're all very aware of. One of the developments that I've seen happening in my area, which is New England, is, and nationally, is the development of a faculty for justice in Palestine. And that point that was raised earlier around safety, that's one of the things we're thinking about. We're here all the time. And so making sure that the YCLers who were arrested at UMass around precisely these issues, they've been also at UMass, the YCL, and the YCL at Smith have been looking into the endowment funding for military industrial corporations that are being profited from by our universities. So there's the level of free speech, as well as the possibility of changing the way that we do business. The American Association of University Professors just released a report on the Florida higher education, and their prediction is dire that this is a free speech issue that goes beyond the moment we're in now and will continue with that kind of government fascistic control over speech on college campuses. So there's a lot going on, and it will continue far into the future, we believe.
Ben, this free speech issue is centering around a important goal, which is reducing hate speech, reducing fighting against anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, anti-immigrant hate, so on and so forth. But in this particular case, anti-Zionism being opposed to the oppression of uh, people in uh, Israel and Palestine, people of Palestinians and other Arabs, uh, is they're being equated with if you say you're anti-Zionist, that you're being anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. Um, Help us understand that.
Well, yeah. I mean, what can one say? I mean, it's outrageous. It's also the oldest trick in the book, in the toolkit of imperialism, because what we have to understand is that in the Jewish community, um, the history of Jewish anti-Zionism is so broad and so deep that even Jerry Nadler, who has a terrible right-wing record of voting to enable Israel's right-wing policies and funding their, $4 billion a year to the military, even he felt compelled to speak out because there's enough. There are Jews who are anti-Zionist from a religious perspective and then from a political perspective. So to equate these things, I think really speaks to the disingenuousness of the entire project of trying to uh, convince the broader Jewish community in the world that we are somehow synonymous with the state of Israel and have to consider ourselves as beholden to those state policies. We don't. The majority of American Jews under 40 are on the somewhere on the spectrum of anti-Zionism, or at least highly critical of the policies of the state of Israel. And this goes right back to its founding. The majority of Jews in the world who were non-religious were socialists, on the spectrum of social democrats to communists. Zionism was a marginal political view, and the state of Israel, which was founded in large part because of British imperialism and Western interests. The West didn't want Jewish Holocaust refugees immigrating to their countries after the end of World War II. Basically engineered for 700,000 Jewish war refugees to go to what was then British Palestine. Now, that was not self-determination. That was not Theodore Herzl's slight, crazed writings didn't just become popular in 1945. That was a Western imperialist move, and Jews were forced to go along with it to a large extent. But there's always been a political history of Jewish anti-Zionism, from a deeply religious perspective on the one hand, and from a deep political commitments in the history of Jewish socialism and communism and anarchism even, all of which are still alive today, have their own institutions. And so that was a deeply offensive resolution, especially considering that the majority of the people voting on it, of course, these were majority Christians voting on a Jewish political matter, and also considering that the largest Zionist organizations in this country today are Christian.
Christians. Interesting. We're Marxists. From an ideological standpoint, Ben, Zionism, wouldn't we say that that's a form of bourgeois nationalism? And this idea that you're with us or you're against us, and therefore any critique of the state of Israel, if you even hint at it, then no matter who or what you are, it's like this blanket condemnation. No, you mentioned Mr. Nadler, Representative Nadler. Let's hear what he had to say in Congress the other day. It was an interesting point he made.
More problematically, the resolution suggests that all anti-Zionism, it states that all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That is either intellectually disingenuous or just factually wrong. And it unfairly implicates many of my Orthodox former constituents in Brooklyn, many of whose families rose from the ashes of the Holocaust. While most anti-Semitism is indeed anti-Semitic, the authors, if they were at all familiar with Jewish history and culture, should know about Jewish anti-Zionism that was and is expressly not anti-Semitic. This resolution ignores the fact that even today, certain Orthodox Hasidic Jewish communities, the Satmar in New York and others, as well as adherents of the pre-state Jewish labor movement, have held views that are at odds with the modern Zionist conception. According to
Hey, Mr. Nadler, it's not just the pre-war.
That's
It's
right.
also big sections of the left, both in this country and internationally, who are Jewish, who are opposed to the state of Israel. So, we need to correct you on that. But that was an important point that he made. Anita, this is a tough question that we're dealing with. When we, how does Marxism, how does the Communist Party address the issue of responding to hate speech in general? I mean, how do you, we used to talk about outlawing racism, outlawing anti-Semitism, outlawing Islamophobia. Can it be outlawed, Anita?
Well, Joe, I think you can outlaw hate speech. I think yesterday, I guess it was yesterday, the presidents of the 3 Ivy League schools did a terrible job talking about hate speech at their congressional hearing. They were being grilled by Elise Stefanik, and I'm sure they were a little bit discombobulated by the whole scene. College presidents aren't selected to be the best um, testifiers in Congress, but they really failed, because if a student professes genocide against all Jewish students, of course that would be considered a form of uh, hostile environment for the Jewish students there, and colleges would take steps against that kind of hate speech. And I think they sort of fail to make that point. Really, what the problem is, as you said, just expanding the word anti-Semitism to include all criticism of Israel. Even people in Israeli peace activists would fall under that as well. They are critical of their government. I mean, we saw demonstrations against Netanyahu all this past year. Those people are not anti-Semites. They're people who are critical of the policies of Israel. So I think we can outlaw hate speech. We can keep people from making those kind of blanket statements, but we can't just expand our definition of and understand what people mean by a certain slogan. For example, one person's interpretation of that slogan is not going to be the same as all others. So I think there's a chance for us to really put put hate speech on notice.
Ben, I want to come back to an issue with respect to Zion. There are people, with respect to Zionism, there are people in Israel who are opposed to the oppression of the Palestinian people, who consider themselves, but who support the right of the state of Israel to exist, who call themselves Zionists. So too in the United States, there are, in fact, I would think that there's a big section of the U.S. Jewish population, perhaps those over 40, because I'm not going to argue with you, who consider themselves like, liberal Zionists or left-wing Zionists. Not that they support the idea of an exclusively Jewish state, but they support Israel's right to exist. Is that a tension that the anti-war movement needs to respond to in building left-center unity in the fight against the occupation?
Well, that's a that's a rich question there, Joe. I think yeah, I think that for one thing, the demand in the streets, on the campuses, in the unions, and we're getting to this. It's later in the program. Is ceasefire now? Ceasefire now. So for one thing, we have to stop. I mean, at this point, we're talking about a murderous, genocidal bombing campaign carried out by the most fascistic right-wing government that in the history of the state of Israel. That has to be stopped. So building a coalition to stop that, we on the left should be willing to work with anybody. And again, I emphasize again that the biggest Zionist organizations in this country today, the most well-funded, and the ones who fund Israel the most, are Christian. So it's not just a Jewish issue. It's not just a Palestinian issue. This has to be a broad movement to stop a U.S. tax funder, funded genocide that's going on. We have to stop that. The broader question of the term Zionism, I think it may be akin to the way in which culturally aspects of the Black nationalist movement are deeply resonant in that community. But I do think we have to be willing to help people themselves question this term, because Zionism to me is a historical artifact. People at this point are just arguing about whether there should be a majority ethno state called Israel. That's what people are talking about. I don't think the term Zionism is particularly helpful in that conversation, but I'm personally against ethno states. But yes, to build a peace, to build an end to the occupation, and certainly an end to this bombing, we obviously have to be willing to work with anybody to stop this atrocity, and we have to be able to stop it now. But yeah, there's a broader question there that I think definitely the left has a role to play in helping people themselves think through that contradiction. Because I don't think many people, even people who call themselves Zionists, mean it in the sense that word implies.
Interesting. We're going to have to come back and discuss this because, again, we have to analyze this from a Marxist standpoint. And there's a difference between the nationalism of an oppressed nation or nationality on the one hand and the nationalism of an oppressing nation. One, the former, the first one I mentioned, of an oppressed nation, has progressive aspects to it. But when you're dealing with the nationalism of an oppressing nation, ain't nothing progressive about that. Nothing. Make America great again, and the chauvinism of the MAGA movement is an indication of that, which brings us to the next point, Lisa. The other day, Mr. Trump said, I'm going to be dictator for a day. And everybody got all riled up about it. But is that really the issue, Lisa? I mean, in your opinion?
I think he was, the way I understand it, is he was being given the chance to deny accusations of him coming in and having fascistic tendencies. And that was his slippery trick. I think the real issue is the refusal of Donald Trump to admit to any kind of commitment to democracy or democratic norms or a state that serves its people. And so I think what we have at the basis of the Trump presidency, even with all the indictments and with all of the legal battles he has still to face, we have the issue of democracy front and center. What are our commitments and who is willing to fight for it?
Good point. Good point. You know, Anita, you know, Lisa mentioned this growing fascist trend of limiting education in Florida, the report you talked about. And you know, they are limiting, kicking student organizations, banning student organizations, expelling students all over. People are being fired. You know, there is a growing limitation on the right to express oneself. Um, and isn't that as important or more important than Trump's indicating, I'm going to be a dictator for a day? It's not, I guess the question I'm asking is, it's about more than Trump as an individual, isn't it? There's a movement behind it, no?
Of course, yes, there is a movement behind it, and it's comprised of this 25% or so of the Republican electorate, 30% that will follow this leader or his successors to the mat to really put a to really rein in a democracy and make the government safe for the most right-wing efforts. And of course, the Heritage Foundation with 2025 is facilitating this. The idea that Trump not only, he had his dictator for a day statement, but he has boasted about what else he's going to do, including weaponization of the government against media, against newspaper writers, against communists and Marxists and anyone who doesn't agree with him. He has threatened that kind of expression. So I think it's just a really frightening idea that he could come into power again. And I'm still a little optimistic that we're still 1 year out, and I hope that people will see as we go on the extremeness of his views and his promises that he's making, saying what he's going to do, and it's really dangerous.
But Ben, there was January the 6th. There's the attack on, what are they called? Critical race theory. There's the attack on Black studies. You know, there are all of these. There's all of these attacks on voting rights. Attacks on trans rights. You know, and you take it as a in addition to all of the language, Trump, I want to shoot the general who didn't agree with me. You know, I'm going to put everybody, immigrants, in these big concentration camps, and so on and so forth. Um, and are you then? But then there's the war. Then there's the war in Gaza, and young people, uh, in Black, Latino, Asian, Arab American, are furious at the Biden administration, and it has the implication of suppressing the vote. Um, how do we respond to that? Because it's a big challenge, you know, and we can't
Yeah.
blame them.
No.
I'm mad too.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think the Communist Party did a great thing in holding a peace conference where we unequivocally condemned uh, Biden's absolutely unacceptable imperialist enabling genocidal violence in Israel Palestine, and we have to continue to do that. We we live in a world where we are trying to save essentially the Democrats from themselves, not for their sake, but for ours, have some opposition party that can actually fight. And where, in some ways, it has to be taken as a good thing that the Koch brothers have shifted their funding over to Nikki Haley. We can only hope that some of it, but we have to build movements in the streets that are consistent. That's what we have to do, because if the Democrats seems like they can't count. I mean, at this point, Palestinians live in swing districts in large numbers, and the hubris, the imperial hubris, to think that they can enable this kind of violence and just expect those votes, is outrageous. And it's our job to be in the streets every day to stop the violence, which will hopefully get these people to come to their senses, if for no other cynical reason than to save their own skins. Because if Biden doesn't stop the violence, no, I don't think I think we're in a very, very dark place if that happens.
And that movement is growing. I mean, that's the only tool that we have. If you think about it, you know, we don't have billions of dollars, but we have ourselves. We have human labor power, and we have our ability to organize and build movements. And it's beginning to have an effect. I mean, you know, there are 400 people in the administration who have said no. 40 members of the White House interns wrote Biden a letter saying hell no. I even hear the Vice President Harris taking issue, somewhat gingerly, but more than before. And then there are 33, I think, now members of Congress, for members of the Senate. There was only one at the beginning. That was Representative Cori Bush. Lisa, the UAW has come out for a complete and immediate ceasefire. The coalition of labor union women, immediate, complete ceasefire. Postal workers, complete, immediate cease. And even on your campus, Smith, students are meeting with labor leaders talking about organizing. What's that looking like?
I think it's very exciting. I think what we're seeing right now is precisely this. We think of electoral politics as one of the tools in our toolkit. We do not imagine that that's where we're going to create the largest, the widest and broadest and most militant base of activists will come on the ground. And the electoral work that we do is a part of that. It allows us to do that kind of organizing. I think what we're seeing right now is old barriers are being broken down because of the seriousness of the threat to democracy. I think the kinds of ways that I see, so we have our most recent union on Smith College campus is student workers. And they immediately started drawing their own campaign came out of their support for dining and housekeeping workers contract renegotiation last year. So those kinds of commitments, I mean, I think what we see is class society of the United States writ large on these small college campuses, as well as the public ones. And there's a way that students are absolutely refusing to buy into the lie of having a college education makes you different from other workers. Absolutely not. We are all workers. And that is as true of faculty who have been also sold the lie that there's some difference between the job that we do and the job that other people do. We are all at the front end of the assault on our basic right to stand up for ourselves in our workplace, build better communities, build better ties between people. None of us want to live in a world where we distrust each other. All of us want to feel like, as the ecological destruction, as the military industrial complex builds, as the US government stops listening to its own populace, we need each other. There's no other way that we can go forward. So that's what I'm seeing happen, both at a community level and at a university and college level. And the kinds of maybe old grievances or old mirages or lies that we're told just drifting away. They no longer make sense in the world we live in.
And people are breaking free of those illusions that constrained us for some time. And even Anita, sections of the working class that haven't organized so much recently are beginning to organize. At Wells Fargo, banking workers, forming unions. Good news, and what is happening in Ohio? Or is there any movement amongst labor that you're aware of that I know this letter is circulating? I think it has about 2,000 signatures calling on the Biden administration to support a ceasefire and its military support for Israel.
Well, Joe, I actually can't say that I hear anything from the Ohio AFL-CIO, for example, in joining this fight. I think they're preoccupied right now with a number of other things happening in Ohio, and it would be good to see them joining this fight. There's some controversy. There's some UAW workers who are working in munitions factories in Ohio, and I'm sure there's some ambivalence there. I'm gratified that the UAW has formed a working group to look into divestment and a just transition from a war economy to a peace economy. So I think I know Ohio workers auto workers are very engaged in the national efforts of the UAW. So I'm hoping there will be some movement there.
I was listening to a memorial service the other day in which one of the great South African communist, Asa Pahat, was being recognized. He's just written a book, and one of his comrades in arms, Ronnie Casillas, made the point. He said, folks, he said, Gaza is at the center of the fight for world peace today. It's at the center of the fight for world peace today. And therefore, it is absolutely imperative that we not only keep the pressure on, we got to turn the heat up. We got to turn the heat up and continue to fight to build the broadest and deepest movement possible. And the fact that the working class and the trade unions in this country are getting into the fight, that can only make it stronger and better. So we reach out to everybody to come, wake up, come to because you cannot militarily solve this problem. Even if you temporarily set back the fighters in Palestine now, you're laying the basis for new fighters to arise 15, 20 years from now. Capitalism, imperialism, you're digging your grave. All of these attempts to wipe, no, it's not going to work. You're tilling, you're sowing seeds of rebellion. And until you address the root causes of that rebellion, well, the rebellion is going to continue to live and thrive. Movements are growing all over the planet, in this country and abroad. Let's end by talking about what is your favorite. What's on Taylor Swift was named, Ben, you're a musician, Times Person of the Year yesterday morning.
Yeah, I'm a fan of early Taylor Swift. I do have to admit that. I don't like it when she's embraced her alt-right fan base later on, but I'm a fan of her.
I'm
And she's a
happy
much
for
better
her.
person of the year than Adolf Hitler, who was Times Person of the Year in 1938.
Oh, God.
I'm happy for her. But let's have a go around. What's your favorite movement of the year? We're not going to talk about individuals. Movement of the year. Who wants to go first? I mean, there's so many. You got Gaza, you got the climate movement, you got the UAW and the Teamsters, you got the abortion rights movement, you got the community control of police movement in Chicago. Anita, what's your favorite? Who would you
Well, I was
name?
going to say the United Auto Workers and their leader, Sean Fain. From the time he tore up the Stellantis contract and threw it in the trash on TikTok, he's just been an inspiration and really talking about working class versus the billionaires. Nobody should be a billionaire. He was saying things that we say, but from a standpoint of having 300 or 400,000 workers behind him. So that was just really exciting. And after you mentioned the abortion rights movement, of course, that's the one that's closest to my heart here in Ohio. So that was also wonderful. But I think the Wells Fargo bankers would never be talking about a union. I think everybody's talking about joining a union, and they're inspired by the United Auto Workers and the victory that they won through struggle and through their strike.
I think it was the workers in the bank, not the bankers in the bank who were
Oh,
calling
no,
for
right. Yeah.
hip hip hooray for Sean Fain. Lisa, what's your favorite? Who would you
It's
name?
hard to choose. It's hard to choose. I think one of my favorite movements is the ways that we're making the connections between the Black Lives Matter organizing from the last many years and those connections that we're looking at the degradation of human rights in the United States and connecting them to what's happening in Palestine. So I think it's those long-term movements like the Defense for Children International that has the basis to respond in humanitarian ways to the crisis in Gaza. But I think I still have to remember the long-term organizing of the anti-racist movement since 2012-13, when we started seeing the uprisings on the streets around the United States. So that we've got that continuity, that we're making those connections between domestic sort of loss of life and lack of humanity for Black people in this country, alongside and connecting that to what's happening and the refusal to mourn even the lives of dead children, men and women in Palestine. That's not a movement, but maybe it's a geist. It's a connection.
That works. That works for me. Ben?
Yeah, for me, it's got to be the street level of the Israel-Palestine, stop, the ceasefire now movement. I mean, this feels like unfinished business. My whole life, starting with the war on terror till now, and to see the unity in the streets, like what Lisa was saying, from the Black Lives Matter movement to the Arab and Jewish and Palestinian communities coming together, is there's no more hope than that. And actually making the Congress tremble and making the Israeli government tremble with the power of that unity and the working class component with the unions all over the world, including World Federation of Trade Unions, getting into the act. It feels like we have the possibility now to move mountains on this issue, which is the center of imperialist violence in the world. So,
Our listening audience, what's your favorite movement? Write us at cpusa@cpusa.org. Let us know. We want to know, and we'll announce it. Give us your top 5. I was going to say 10, but that's a lot. Your top 5, and for me, it's the unity of all, because that's what That's what it's going to take to defeat big capital in this country, is the unity of all. What did that young man say? I love that slogan. United we bargain, divided we beg. They have that's the last word today. Lisa, thank you so much for coming. We'll have you back. Ben, you as
Thank
well.
you.
Y'all should become regulars on Good Morning Revolution.
Anytime.
Everybody else, we'll see you next week. Until then, stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.